Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. We bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Joining us again today is Jay Anglin. Jay, welcome back to the show.
Always great to be here.
Now, Jay provides the migration alerts and the migration updates for ducks.org for the Great Lakes region. And Jay's always a great guest to have on because he is in the know for pretty much the whole region. Right now, it's pretty awesome because he's sitting in a field getting ready to set decoys. So we caught up to him. Jay, how's the season been up there for you?
Well, it's just like everywhere else. It's been a weather issue. There's days when you go out and you kind of you're surprised you did okay, but a lot of times the birds just aren't moving. And I hear a lot of people talking about how there's not any birds, there's no birds, it's just terrible. There are actually quite a few birds lurking, around the countryside and some of the prime areas. They just don't do a whole lot. So on days when it's appropriate, when you get some good weather and it's, you get some wind or some precipitation or all the above, generally we've been doing pretty good. I can't complain. The weather's the weather. You can't do anything about it, right?
Yeah, you're still out there hunting. I mean, that's what we're dealing with in the South. Really, really warm weather. I mean, killing mosquitoes type weather. And, we're getting out there and we're hunting and we're finding some birds and, they're getting stale. But the good news is, which is why I wanted to bring you on today, is that weather is going to be a real shakeup for pretty much a majority of the Mississippi central flyways and probably some of the Atlantic flyways as well. What are you seeing up there as far as how's your weather going to change in northern Indiana just drastically this weekend?
Yeah, so I'm in the north zone. I'm about, a couple miles from the Michigan state line where I'm sitting right now. And we were kind of like ground zero for the last of the holdouts as far as birds coming down. They're starting to mass up in these classic areas where, when I was younger would be places where they would winter. So these birds are our winter birds, a lot of them. But because of this sustained warm weather, a lot of these really key areas where birds have been kind of concentrated in the full moon when they've been feeding at night, there's not a lot of food, to be honest with you. It's not, sooner or later it runs out. So a lot of our moist soil areas that are key right now, that's a huge deal because we were so dry. A lot of these wet areas grew up in a lot of moist soil vegetation. And then we got plenty of precipitation for the last month and a half or so. And so they're flooded. So there's birds everywhere. All that is going to change Saturday. It's going to freeze up. Birds will jump into moving water, big lakes. We're getting down in single digits here on Sunday. So these birds up here will be the hardiest birds that no one down south ever sees. And the ones that are hanging out with them are going to be gone. And they're going to be down south as far as they have to go to make a living. So
one thing we've talked about around here is those mid-latitude states have really held on to the ducks this year with this warm weather. And I think everyone who hunts, throughout several of these southern states, especially where I hunt in Arkansas, we're kind of looking up and we're just like, man, something's got to give. Like these birds are, we're hearing reports of, massive pintail numbers in Indiana and Illinois. And we're just like, those things should be down here. Like, what are they doing? So that's good news. And we'll come back to Indiana here, but let's do a quick little roundup of, the Great Lakes region. Obviously, you've got Minnesota, Wisconsin, they're done. Seasons are done. They have some ice in the northern tiers of those states, some snow cover. Even yesterday, central Minnesota got a bunch of snow. So those areas should not be holding many birds. And granted, there's probably some holdouts up there, but those areas should be, those birds should be gone. But when we start talking about Illinois and northern Indiana and even Ohio, southern Michigan is another good example. Michigan was really a bright spot this season. You talked about it several times, how, who knows why, but maybe it's because the prairies were dry, but, Michigan was holding a lot of birds there for a while. So let's kind of pinpoint in on some of these regions. So you talk to a lot of guys in northern Ohio. What are you hearing there?
So, they picked up a bunch of birds per the migration alert, which was, I believe, 2 weeks ago. And those Lake Erie marshes are huge magnets. A ton of birds from Ontario and Michigan and Western Quebec just pile in there. Those birds, those Lake Erie marshes are going to start freezing in earnest. I mean, legit freezing this weekend. And it doesn't say cold forever, but the fact is that once those freeze up, obviously you'll have bluebills and et cetera out on the open water of Lake Erie this year, as you will on Lake Michigan for that matter. But a lot of those birds are going to skedaddle, and they're going to head into the central part, the interior of Ohio, the north zone, and down even into the south zone. So those guys that have been kind of waiting, it should happen, I would suspect. Indiana, we are just covered with birds. I mean, there's obviously some dead zones. There always is. But in the key areas, we have a lot of birds. Now, does that mean guys are going out and doing really, really well? Again, it goes to the weather and scouting and skills and all that. But the guys that know what's up, they're doing pretty good. Illinois, it's kind of odd. Over on the state line of Indiana, there's another little dead zone there. And that's probably because for whatever reason, some birds over here, maybe we wouldn't normally see, i.e. the pintails, that would go down through Illinois and down to say where you guys are in Arkansas and Tennessee and Kentucky and Southern Missouri and all that. They seem to have a little dead zone there. So the IRV, the Mississippi over in Illinois is usually drawing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of birds. And a lot of these birds coming through Indiana right now are working their way down to that Wabash River Valley, which people really don't talk about much. But as you know, being a guy from Terre Haute, Indiana, Wabash River Valley has a lot of waterfowl habitat and more every year. So it's starting to draw more birds in years like this where they're not quite getting to you guys and they're just kind of coming down from here. I think the big mashup's going to be in the central part of Ohio, Indiana, central down to southern Indiana, and then southern Illinois. I think you're going to see a big influx of birds. Michigan's still holding a bunch of birds. Those birds are not going to hang around much longer. At least the ones that don't winter there.
What are you hearing about the geese along that northern edge of Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana? Are you expecting, a big influx into the central portions of these states as this cold weather hits, or are those geese those things hold out for so long? They're pretty hardy, and I know that Milwaukee, Chicago suburban area, that area just holds so many Canadas, and do you think those things might get a little bump? Some hunters may see some.
You might see some of the migrant, some of the birds like the interior race birds that kind of, go back to the traditional push of, getting down south a little further. But my opinion is it's not going to be very substantial for geese. I mean, we have some big pockets of geese. I know, I live in northern Indiana, and in my town alone, there's probably 4,000 to 5,000 right now. Bouncing around with a few specks, and I'm talking Canadas with a few specks mixed in and a smattering of snows. I did talk to a guy about a half hour ago that told me in southern Indiana they had probably 50K specks in his area, and he said they're down to about 10, and he didn't know where they went. Well, I know where they went. They're up here because we're seeing a bunch of specks. So will those specks hang out with these big local Canadas and freeze their little tootsies off? We'll see. They have been doing that in January, generally speaking, in the last few years. So I suspect the goose thing won't be nearly as profound as it will for these ducks.
Yeah, I mean, I think, growing up, and like you mentioned, I grew up on that Wabash River corridor right there and hunting all of that area. And, we even had more Canadas there then than they get now. I mean, those things continue to stay further and further north. But I'm sure those guys will pick up some birds. Kind of a rule of thumb for us there was we never really had great hunting until those marshes around Lake Michigan froze. Where you guys are, northern Indiana, all of those small marshes up there, moist soil units, things like that needed to freeze up before we started really picking up good numbers on the Wabash River. And it sounds like that's going to happen. So that may be good news for some of those, southern Indiana, southern Illinois hunters who are really expecting that. You mentioned that, there's a lot of pintails flying around up there. You're hearing reports of that. Is that somewhat of an oddity for you guys?
Yeah, so I've always been lucky because where I live in Northwest Indiana, I'm kind of in, if you wanted to call it an area of Indiana, like sort of like a pintail area, I'm in it. So for me to kill pintails and see them is pretty regular occurrence. But to see them in the numbers we have now where they're outnumbering mallards is unprecedented. And that's just not one little area. It's everywhere. And, guys that normally text me, yeah, we did pretty good this morning, got a few greenheads. They're like, done with our pintails, right out of the gate, done with pintails. I've heard that 20 times in the last week and a half, between the North Zone in Indiana, between the South Zone. Guys in Michigan are talking about they're still seeing pintails. So we have a lot of pintails. And that goes all the way down to the report I just got from Southern Indiana as of this morning, down in that sort of Ohio River, Wabash River corridor. Guys are field hunting. And they had flocks of 300 plus pintails coming in after they were done with pintails, literally up until about a half hour ago, and that's insane, man.
Yeah,
Really is.
And I even know some guys around Terre Haute who were hunting last week, and they shot a handful of pintails as well. Which, I mean, they shoot a few here and there, but yeah, I mean, when they're immediately saying, "Yeah, we're done with pintails, but waiting on something else," like, "Whoa, that's interesting." So I would imagine that some of those birds are probably going to get bounced out of some of those areas as this big north wind blows in on Saturday. At least that's the optimism that I'm going to hold out for down here in the South.
I think you're spot on that. I think these pintails aren't going to be around much longer.
One thing I want to talk to you about, you shot, what'd you refer to it as, a Northern Indiana trifecta? Tell us a little bit about that, because I never really heard that, but I thought it was a pretty cool picture you sent.
Yeah, so that was at the last day of our first split, which was a couple weeks ago, and it was in this exact farm I'm sitting on right now. And it was kind of a mixed spread, a little sheet water up against a ditch, and there was, I believe, 5 or 6 of us, and we having a great day on greenheads and blacks. Actually, the farmer had a special request. He said, "You can hunt it as long as you can get me a big Drake black duck to get mounted. I've always wanted one." And so I got through my mallards, and then I said, "All right, I'm on pintail and black duck duty." Got my pintail pretty quick. And I kid you not, I had one shell left in my gun. I was about half asleep laying there next to this ditch. And I look up, and here comes this black duck, and I roll him up, and it's a big Drake black duck. So to go greenhead bull sprig with a nice sprig on it and a big adult, mature black duck in 3 shots that's special.
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool.
No, that is pretty awesome. I showed that picture around the office a little bit, just kind of pointing out that, you're up there in Northern Indiana, which, I mean, I guess historically that was a great waterfowl, but then it kind of declined. But now it seems to be really picking up and benefiting from some of these warmer temperatures where you're right at that edge. So that's just a spectacular story. You have any other updates from around the region? I know you'd briefly mentioned some Illinois and some of that Illinois River Valley. Are you hearing anything out of there?
Well, the latest report from the aerial surveys indicated that, the IRV, the Illinois River Valley, is finally starting to kind of unload a little bit. They're below long-term averages now overall in the IRV, because those birds have been there. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of birds have been there for so long that all that food has been essentially tapped out. And, you'd expect them to stick around a little bit in a warm day, but they get a little cool night and off they go. On the other hand, the Mississippi River Valley, which is, the central Mississippi is right there just to the west of the IRV. It's holding incredible numbers. And so those birds are going to roll down the Mississippi. And if you're down south and you're looking north, you expect to see them soon. I have a feeling you're going to start seeing a pretty good pit push through there, as some of the birds that are holding out in the Dakotas and places like that where the season's closed, but now they're getting some frigid temps coming in. They're all just going to go. That's my prediction. It could be wrong, but I hope I'm not for you guys down there. So
yeah, I mean, that whole area up there is supposed to go into single digits and kind of what I guess we would consider a prolonged cold now, which is probably 4 or 5 days below freezing, in single digits and teens at night. And that's really what we need as far as, lower Mississippi alluvial valley hunters. I mean, we're really dependent on, there's some great habitat up there. And when it's not cold, what are you going to do if you're a duck? I'd stay up there too. But I think we're going to get a little pulse here. It's exactly what we need. And maybe if we can get one more before the season goes out, we'll be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I think you guys this is a really great scenario. We're going to end on a high note and put away our duck decoys and with a big smile on our face, and switch to geese, and it should be perfect for geese. So all is well that ends well up here, and I just hope everybody down there gets a good shot at some of these birds, because there's a bunch up here still. So I suspect it'll be real good.
Yeah, and your guys' season closes on Monday, correct?
Yeah, it closes Monday. Michigan has a 2-day split this weekend. That's always pretty spectacular because they've been closed for weeks, and so everything's loaded up and stabilized, and so guys go in there. And honestly, Lake Michigan's been spectacular. I talked to guys who've been going out and shooting lots of longtails and bluebills and even scoters offshore. It's pretty specialized stuff. You don't just go out there in any old boat and you're talking 100 to 150, feet of anchor line, at least one anchor. So, but they're doing well out there too. And that's available any day. So, guys, I know a couple guys planning on doing that in Michigan this weekend. And, But yeah, again, we're going to end on a high note, so it's going to be pretty cool.
Awesome, man. It sounds good. That's good news for everybody throughout the Central and Mississippi flyways as those birds trickle through with this front. Should be exciting. Everyone can get ready. This is kind of what, as a waterfowl hunter, this is kind of what we all wait, sit around and wait for and talk about. One big weather system to really lock some things up north. Before I get you out of here, Jay, one thing I always ask you, how's the fishing?
Well, this whoop-de-doo style of weather where it's just up and down, up and down. It's really hard to get on fish, and so it's been okay. I'll say that. There's some days it's great. I think I'm a rock star, and other days I scratch my head and think, why did I ever get into this? But I've been guiding a lot. I've been on the river. People are happy. At the end of the day, they have a smile on their face. That's all I can do on a slow day of fishing. So I suspect fishing will be real good coming up too, because we actually need some cold to set these fish and get them, to stop moving, steelhead to stop moving up the river. So yeah, I appreciate you asking, but it's been frustrating. I can tell you that.
Awesome. Well, that's good. As long as everyone has a smile on their face, that's all that matters. Jay, I appreciate you jumping on today and kind of giving everyone an update. And I think this is an exciting show because we are waiting for the weather and you're bringing nothing but good news. You might be the most popular guest ever.
Well, I hope I'm not wrong. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, don't be wrong. You'll get an email. I'd like to thank my guest, Jay Anglin, for coming on the show and providing a Great Lakes region update on the incoming weather. I'd like to thank our producer, Chris Isaac, for putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the DU podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And visit www.ducks.org/DU podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.